Equality Day and recognize what has been a joyous, liberating, and powerful Pride Month in the city of Boston and all around the country. And I'm pleased to be standing here today with leaders of the movement for justice and equality, including Paul Glass, Program Coordinator for the LGBTQ Elders of Color, Treyandre Carmel Valentine, Executive Director for the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, Tanya Neslucin, Executive Director of Mass Equality, Taylor Belfield, Psych Nurse Practitioner with Trans Health, Malia Khan, Legislative Director for State Senator Liz Miranda. And I also want to give a special thank you to Cheryl Slaughter, owner of Soleil, right here for hosting us in Nubian Square. If you need a good meal, this is the place to be. And she's expanded over the Boston Public Market, right over near Quincy Market, for anyone who wants to really have a great meal. So we thank you, Cheryl. Nubian Square is not just the historic home in Boston for fierce activism in the battle for justice and freedom for everyone. Nubian Square continues as home base for the intersectional movement building that centers every race, gender, nationality, faith, and sexual identity. And we are here in the city of Boston, where the Combahee River Collective was founded nearly 50 years ago. The collective released a statement authored by Barbara Smith, Beverly Smith, and Demita Frazier that stated, "The personal is political." Their lives were evidence that there is no true freedom without addressing pervasive white supremacy, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia in our society. This was as much true in 1969 when a black trans women and drag queens pushing back against police brutality and the criminalization of the LGBTQ community started the Stonewall Uprising and lit a fire in the LGBTQ rights movement. When people stand against systemic injustice, it is the responsibility of those in the halls of power to be with them and tear the injustice down, brick by brick. And in this moment, the need to stand in solidarity with the LGBTQ communities is as urgent as ever. There is a civil rights battle being fought from our schools and health centers to the halls of government. Politicians are using a decades-old playbook on discrimination to punish and dehumanize people for who they are with the force of law. They are working quickly to pass hundreds of laws that aim to criminalize the LGBTQ community, their families, and their health care. This movement to stigmatize the LGBT community is all across our country, and state legislatures all across the country, with bills by the hundreds which have been introduced to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. And we in Massachusetts have to be the leader to stand up and to fight for the LGBTQ community. That's why we're here today. That's what Equality Day is all about. And that same flavor that is fueling violence by far-right extremists targets those who are most vulnerable. Trans people, particularly black trans women, are facing extraordinary violence in our society. Drag shows are being attacked. Hospitals providing gender-affirming care are receiving bomb threats. And for the first time in their organization's history, the Human Rights Campaign declared a national state of emergency for LGBTQ Americans. This is 2023. This is unacceptable. For those individuals, the personal is very, very political. These real threats require real action. That is why I am working in the halls of Congress to pass bills to protect LGBTQ Americans and remove systemic barriers which they face. This includes my LGBTQ Panic Defense Prohibition Act. This bill will ban the bigoted defenses that blame the victim's gender identity, expression, or sexual orientation to excuse violent acts. And I'm filing this bill in memory of Matthew Shepard and Nikki Kuhnhausen, a gay man and trans woman who were murdered and whose killers used the panic defense to escape justice. We cannot allow our courts to be complicit in attacks against members of the LGBTQ community. You cannot allow a defendant who has harmed or murdered someone who is LGBTQ to say, my defense is, I panicked when I found out that they were in the LGBTQ community. I just panicked. So I should be excused for the harm which I did. I should be excused for the murder of that individual. That is just absolutely unacceptable. We cannot allow that to be a defense in a courtroom in the United States of America for a harm done to a member of the LGBTQ community. And we have to go further. So I'm also announcing new legislation, the Gender Affirming Care Act, to fund research at the National Institutes of Health and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to study barriers to gender-affirming care. Basic health care for trans people is too often too expensive or even too dangerous. This legislation will light the path forward for understanding and addressing these barriers. But this is just one piece of the puzzle. I'm fighting for Medicaid coverage for the cost of crossing state lines to get gender-affirming care, removing barriers to gender-affirming hormone therapy like testosterone, stronger enforcement of healthcare anti-discrimination law, and assistance for health providers getting death threats to safely provide medically necessary gender-affirming care. We're in the midst of this generation's fight for equality, using the legacy of those who marched and boycotted and fought and died for a better future as our guide. We must stand with the people who live at the intersection of oppression embedded in the fabric of our society. We must resist every injustice, stop every effort past discrimination into law because they are wrong and this community is right in their fight for peace and assuring their right to be free. Trans rights are human rights, LGBTQ rights are human rights, and we are going to defend them. The fight for equality and justice for all does not start or end with Pride Month or Equality Day, because we know there is no justice for any of us until there is justice for all of us. So we thank all of you for being here with us today and for having me. When joy is protest, may we celebrate together. Happy Pride to everyone. And now I'd like to begin by introducing Paul Glass, the program coordinator of LGBTQ Elders of Color. Paul Glass is a founding member of LGBTQ Elders of Color. He has been an activist in the LGBTQ community for decades, including while at the historic Stonewall riots. So I'm delighted that he could be with us today. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for your historic leadership.
Thank you, Senator. As the Senator has mentioned, I'm Paul Glass, Program Coordinator for LGBTQ+ Elders of Color. And I'm delighted to be gathered here in the space at Soleil Restaurant, located in Nubian Square in Roxbury. The owner, Cheryl Strata, has been a huge supporter of our endeavors, our Flashback Cafe, a monthly supper club for LGBTQ older adults. And she also operates a satellite location in Boston Public Market at Haymarket Square in Boston. I've been invited here this morning in support of two very important U.S. Senate bills sponsored by Senator Ed Markey: the Gender Affirming Care Act and the LGBTQ plus Panic Defense Prohibition Act of 2023. The first bill to be introduced will authorize the appropriation of funds to the National Institutes of Health and to Centers of Disease Control and Prevention for conducting or supporting research and barriers to gender affirming care, also referred to as the Gender Affirming Care Act. As a community, we know that inadequate and disproportionate care exists within our healthcare system, directly impacting queer and transgender individuals, particularly individuals of color. Not enough research data is available to effectively address this inequity. This bill will fix that. The other bill to be introduced is the LGBTQ plus Panic Defense Prohibition Act of 2023. This bill will amend Title 18, the U.S. Code, to prohibit panic defenses based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. And personally, I am just amazed that this antiquated law still remains on the books. It allows a perpetrator to do harm to LGBTQ individuals and then have the nerve to claim justification using and being wrapped in the cloak of this inadequate law as their defense. It mitigates responsibility, resulting in unjustifiable acquittals and sentencing reductions. In effect, the predator becomes the victim. This bill will fix that. In today's climate, where multiple states have enacted laws that diminish our rights, it's incumbent upon us to come together and urge congressional legislators in both the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives to vote yes on both these bills. As a survivor of Stonewall, myself and my husband, I know as many, over the years it may have seemed to have been a bit whitewashed, but there were lots of folks of color who were there fighting the good fight, protesting, totally unaware that it was going to become a revolution. But that's what it became. We've been fighting for our rights for decades. I am weary of fighting to try to stay, to be recognized and to be declared free from harm and discrimination. We are in hopes that these bills will help to elevate our position in society as human beings. So, folks, we can do this. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Triandre Kamal Valentine, the Executive Director of Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. Triandre has been advocating for trans rights for 15 years with over 10 years of experience supporting LGBTQ survivors of domestic violence and working for LGBTQ inclusion through an anti-oppression framework. Triandre is a champion for the trans community in Massachusetts, also serving on the Boston Human Rights Commission. It's my pleasure to introduce them to you right now. Triandre.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. Happy Pride and happy Equality Day. So my name is Triandre Valentine. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. And for folks of you who don't know, MTPC is the oldest active transgender advocacy organization in the United States. Since 2001, we have successfully advocated for legal protections and rights at the statewide level and various municipalities in Massachusetts. In 2011, MTPC led the coalition that successfully passed the Transgender Equal Rights Bill, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity and expression in employment, housing, credit and lending, and education. And in 2015, MTPC co-chaired the Yes on 3 campaign, successfully updating Massachusetts' long-standing civil rights laws to include non-discrimination protections for trans people in public places in 2016, and successfully defending these protections in the 2018 November ballot. As MTPC's executive director, I'm here in support of the Gender Affirming Care Access Research for Equity Act, or the Gender Affirming Care Act, which would authorize funds for the NIH and CDC to study the barriers to gender affirming care and how these barriers impact health, as well as the LGBTQ Panic Defense Prohibition Act, which would prohibit the legal defense strategy that asks a jury to find that a victim's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression is to blame for the defendant's violent reaction, including murder. Both these bills are interconnected because at the core, these bills are about acknowledging and advocating for the humanity of transgender non-binary people and treating us with dignity and respect. There is no humanity in blaming someone's sexuality or gender identity or gender expression for the violence that's enacted upon them. And there is no humanity in denying access to healthcare simply for how someone identifies and seeks to live their own life. Gender affirming care is for everyone, everybody. People think gender affirming care only applies to transgender individuals, but the majority of people who seek gender affirming care, whether it's hormones or body augmentation, are cisgender. Transgender people face some of the greatest health disparities in our community, largely due to a lack of access. When MTPC did its community needs assessment in 2019, we found that the healthcare needs of folks was having access to insurance, a knowledgeable provider. Some of the biggest concerns for safety concerns for transgender people were safety, public harassment. And so we know when access to care is equal and equitable, when we have knowledgeable and culturally competent providers, when our health systems are inclusive and affirming, our health disparities decrease and our health incomes increase. By restricting access to care, the message that sends is that only certain groups have rights and are deserving. But see, when you ban access to some, you're actually truly banning access for all. Attacking transgender people does not only stop at transgender people. I am starting to hear increased horror stories of cisgender women being attacked because someone thinks that they are transgender. The LGBTQ panic defense is harmful to both transgender and cisgender people alike and must be removed. And so I want to thank Senator Markey and his team for continuing to advocate for equality and equity and being grounded in our humanity. The last thing I will say is that transgender people, non-binary people, we do represent an internal freedom and power that cannot and will never be erased. And that is what cisgender people find so threatening. So I think that if cisgender people focused more on their internal power, their own internal freedom, we probably won't be needing bills like this, right? But for now, this is where we are, and we must continue to fight for the equality and equity of all, and all means transgender and non-binary individuals. Thank you so much.
And Tanya, does Tanya, would you like to say a word? Just on equality day.
So on Equality Day, just as the Executive Director of Mass Equality, I just want to say how grateful I am to the Senator for bringing forth these bills and for prioritizing our community. As we know, we are in extremely tumultuous times, both here in Massachusetts and across the nation. And it's really vitally important that the LGBTQ community comes together as a community, and that the cisgender heterosexual community bands together behind us. We need our allies now in this moment more than we have in several years, and I just want to thank the Senator for stepping forward and supporting us at this time.
Thank you so much. And, Kayla Bellafield, would you like to say anything?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Taylor Belfield. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and advocacy consultant with TransHealth. We provide gender-affirming care in Western Massachusetts. So I think these are two fantastic bills, and I thank Senator Markey and his team for having us here today and proposing them. But what's really important is for me, as both a clinician and someone who works in policy, it's kind of heartbreaking to see, my patients, and then also see people in the community who are really suffering. So this really is beneficial on so many fronts, to have people to not fear legally, to not have them fear in the healthcare space, to have my voice elevated as a gender fluid person, as a person who works with the trans and diverse community. This is super important. So yeah, just thank you so much. I really think this is going to be a great opportunity. So again, thank you so much, Senator.
Great. So it's Equality Day, but we have a lot more work to do, and we know that. And that's what these bills are about, and that's what this movement is about. That's what all of these great leaders do every single day to advance us closer to true equality in our society. So any questions that people may have?
Can you comment on the upheaval in Russia over the weekend? It's very dramatic.
It's very clear that Putin does not have total control over Russia. This shows great instability, and it's very important for us as a result to ensure that we provide the support for Ukraine that makes it impossible for an autocracy run by Putin to overrun a democracy that the Ukrainian people are fighting so hard to preserve.
So you think there'd be a shift to the right? That could be the worst thing in Russia?
On the one hand, there's clearly a battle going on in Russia, and that struggle internally is one that ultimately, in my opinion, can help Ukraine, and that's what I think the United States, on a bipartisan basis,